It's the end of 2022, which means it's time for my big annual plot review. So we'll look at the highs, the lows, and everything in between that's happened this year. It's good to be back after a little Christmas break. I hope you had a fantastic Christmas if you celebrate. And yeah, we're in the run up now to the new year. So before 2022 is over and out, we're here for the big review. So in previous years, I've done my best crop, my worst crop, things like that. Doing it a little bit different this year. We'll just look at the highs, the lows, some of my favourite projects. And if we've got time at the end, I'll squeeze in a very short Q&A as well, where I'll answer 5 questions that you've popped over to me on Instagram. So yeah, this year, what a year it's been. It's definitely had its challenges, and I think we've all felt that. Mainly the heat wave, that's caused a few issues. I mean, it was just unbearably hot. It was 39, approaching 40 in the highest point of summer, which caused a few challenges. So let me go into let's start with the lows, shall we? Because we don't want to end on the low notes. Let me just get my notes out. I've made so many pages of notes here. So yes, the heat wave was the main challenge, I think, because it caused other issues. So inside my polytunnel, I grow my tomatoes and my chilies, and through the winter, it just stores other plants. But the thing is, because it's under that tunnel, it never gets rained on, which means the ground is already going to be quite dry. And because I planted some of my tomatoes and chilies a bit late, it meant that by the time they had their roots in the ground, they were really struggling to go deep enough to get any water, and they just suffered. And just watering in general was a challenge because the ground was already dry. We had quite a dry spring, and it just led on to a very, very dry and hot summer. So the ground was just parched, and when you're watering, it just didn't seem to do much, which meant that the crops in the tunnel really suffered, and a few others did as well. But yeah, my polytunnel crops were probably my worst crops this year. I barely had many tomatoes at all. So yeah, my tomatoes were one of my biggest failures this year, which was a shame. Another epic fail was on the pest side of things. So I had a problem with thrips in my flat. It's quite a long story, but to summarise, the previous winter I tried to overwinter a chilli. I brought it into the flat, forgot about it for a while, and then when I saw it, it was covered in thrips. That then moved to my houseplants, and they lingered. I used different methods to try and get rid of them, including using good bugs to get rid of the bad bugs. But after a few applications, that didn't work, which meant basically my new seedlings, my chilies, started to get the thrips, even though I thought I'd got rid of them. So from the get-go, they had thrips. And then another pest that had quite a big effect on some of my growings was spider mite. Spider mite thrives in really hot, dry conditions. So by the summertime, it was having a great old time on my dahlias, particularly, which meant that they didn't really get going until like about September, I'd say. Some of them didn't even sort of get going really, like the Wizard of Oz that were up here. They were affected so badly, poor things. So yeah, they were the 2 pests of the year that drove me mad. Fortunately, things like spider mite doesn't sort of hibernate in the winter, so all that cold weather we've had would have killed all that off, and I can start a fresh new year with my same dahlias, and they should be absolutely fine. The thrips, on the other hand, if you ever get them in your houseplant collection, I just say cut your losses and chuck the plant before it infects other plants, because they are little menaces to get rid of. Another bad one as a crop failure was definitely my parsnips, because I sowed them quite late, which I usually do, and it's usually absolutely fine. I sow them sort of late May, sometimes even early June, and because the ground was so dry and then even drier, it was just a nightmare trying to get them to germinate and then keeping those seedlings alive because the ground is so parched. And those couple of weeks are absolutely crucial in keeping the soil damp. So I think, that was a bit of an epic fail, sadly, which leads on to a lesson learnt, which I'll get to shortly. And also my peas. Yes, my peas were a bit of a failure. I think it just started to get too hot for them too soon, and they like having cool roots and quite cooler conditions. They really thrive having their roots in the shade and their head in the sun, and I don't think they like the heat either. So they started to produce, which was good, and then the heat came and they all even just sort of dried and shriveled up in their pods, which was a shame. So those were the bad bits in a very quick summary. Some of them were quite sad and upsetting, like the tomatoes, my lack of tomatoes and chilies, but you can't let them get the better of you. Let's look at the good. So one of my best crops this year was probably my blackberries, which was a bit of a surprise because it had been so hot and dry, and you think that berries like raspberries and strawberries, they're like quite damp soil, so they can fill up and get all nice and fruity. And my strawberries weren't great, and my raspberries were pathetic, actually. My raspberries could really go in the bad list as well. But the blackberries, they were prolific, and they tasted incredible. So they started quite early, and when they came, oh my gosh, like my freezer is still full of them. But they tasted, the flavour was just like no other blackberry I'd had before. This year was just exceptional for the blackberries. I think all that sunshine just really sweetened up all the sugars, and they tasted amazing. And most of them are in my hedges. I don't exactly have an area dedicated to blackberry because I just forage them through the hedgerows, and they come up like weeds. So, well, they are definitely quite a thuggish weed, but a fruitful one. So yeah, that's definitely up there in my best harvest this year. Now one of the other successes, one of my favourite flowers this year, were my cosmos, because they were completely unfazed by the heat wave, and they just carried on blooming their socks off, and just having them here along my front pathway where I could walk in between them with them sort of blowing around in the wind, and all the bees were all over them. That is one of my favourite crops of flower that I've grown this year, and they just kept coming and coming, and I just absolutely love them. They're just so dreamy and elegant, and I love my cosmos. So that's probably my favourite flower this year because it's the one that did the best. Another good thing was my beetroot. I harvested beetroot this year, and I managed to also pickle them. Did make a video on it, which is good because last year I didn't have any beetroot. Now, I'm not saying that it was a raging success and that I was drowning in them and they were the size of my head. It was just a small victory. I had some beetroot. So it's about time I actually opened one of those jars and started to eat some of that, because it'll be nicely matured by now. Also, in terms of crops, my potatoes were good. I'm not going to say they were amazing. They were good. And I was quite pleasantly surprised, actually, because we had such a dry summer. I thought they were going to be really small. There won't be many of them. But yeah, I was quite pleasantly surprised that we had quite a good year for potatoes. But also my apples were prolific. And I remember during early June I was expecting the apple drop, which is when it releases some of the excess apples that it doesn't need because it overproduces sometimes. That didn't happen, and I thought that's quite a lot of apples, and the poor tree was starting to weigh down. So yeah, it was a fantastic year for my apples. And another epic thing was that garden shows were back on. After 2 years of being separate from everybody, no shows, no mingling, no talking to other people in person, we were allowed to go to garden shows, and I went to BBC Gardeners World Live, which was great, and I got to meet quite a few of you as well. You came up and said hello, which was so lovely, honestly, made my day. And just to be back at the shows, it was so inspiring. And seeing Frances Top Hill's show garden, that was an epic highlight of the show for me. And yeah, it was just great to be back and purchasing from lovely nursery people. And so that was another highlight, I'd say. Oh yeah, and lastly, another one of my favourite flowers this year was my honesty plants, because in the spring, that white flower So beautiful, and it carried on and on and on. And then after the flower, I got that beautiful little disky seed head, which I've also harvested and dried. So double whammy, so easy to grow, and it was everywhere, and it was just so dreamy and white. And I'm definitely growing quite a lot of that next year for my wedding flowers. As for my projects this year, things that I've started that are new or new features, one of the main ones is my grass paths. So I used to have wood chip paths that I'd remulch every sort of 9 months or so, and I completely flipped that up for grass partly to see if it made any difference to the red ant populations on my allotment that like to nip at my legs and my feet in the summer, and they drive me bonkers. I'm not going to dwell on them, but so many of you have asked, how are the paths doing and has it made any difference to the ants? And whilst I can safely say it hasn't got rid of the ants, it's definitely helped make the situation better, is what I'd say, because with the wood chip, I'd quite often sort of kick the wood chip and disturb it quite a lot as I walked. But as for the grass, it's very soft and bouncy, so my feet tend to sort of sink into it and not sort of shake it up too much, shall we say. And I find that I'm disturbing fewer nests because the ants don't nest really in the grass. They nest nearby under the rocks that I've still not moved. So I'm finding I'm disturbing them less, which means they're less aggravated and they don't bother me. I mean, I'm still very cautious about sitting down. I probably wouldn't casually just sit my bum down on the grass. I'd still be very wary that the ants are there. But I'm a lot more relaxed. I'm checking my feet much less because I know I'm not disturbing them as much. So on that sense, it's a success. But also just on the front of making my plot look quite different. It's really brightened it up, making it look much greener and fresher in these darker, drearier winter months. Yes, it's more maintenance, but honestly, it doesn't bother me at all. It takes like 10 minutes to completely cut. I now have noticed that it's not looking so great over there, which is where some of my cosmos completely flopped over under the weight of the stems. So I do need to perhaps re-sow that patch, but doesn't bother me because cosmos looked amazing. So yeah, I just have to, that's a little job for early springtime. So yes, on the whole, big success for the grass. Love it. It's definitely going to stay. So I hope that answers some of your questions about it. My favourite project of 2022 has to be my new ornamental pond that I started in the summer months. So it was when I went to BBC Gardeners World live show, and I was so inspired by the Lincolnshire pond plants display. And I already had in mind an idea for a new pond, and I've transformed this galvanised water tank into an ornamental pond with fish. And I should actually mention, I know some of you are quite worried about the fish. I can report, and I'm pleased to say, that all 4 of them did survive the deep freeze that we had recently when we had ice as thick as about 4 or 5 inches deep. I counted them yesterday, they're all there, they're all fine, so very happy about that. But yeah, so I planted a Sarracenia in my little rock. That was a fun project to do. I know it looks a little bit dead, but it's definitely very much alive, just a little bit wintry right now. And I just get so much pleasure from this little patch because in the summer months I sat here quite a bit in the shade that I get from down here and just sat, and it was just so relaxing to watch the fish, to listen to the bubbles of the small pump, the solar powered pump that's still going, just about in the depths of winter. And yeah, it was just really relaxing and I just get so much enjoyment from it. So yeah, this is without doubt my favourite new feature of 2022. My microphone's just conked out, so I apologise, the sound will be a little bit lower now. But there's one last thing that was my favourite thing this year, and it's inside the polytunnel. It's not a big feature, it's nothing very fancy, but it's something that's changed how I grow, and it's this table. I know, very boring, but I made this table, it's very wobbly and rickety, from this piece of wood that I've had knocking about for so long, and it's quite big and bulky, so I do move it down by the shed when I'm not using it here. But but it's just given me such a better platform to sow my seeds on, to grow things on, and it's sturdy, it's not going anywhere. Whereas before I had to sort of use those rickety sort of shelving racks, and I was always a bit anxious they were going to fall over. And this is just great. It's just great. So that's another of my favourite things for this year, because it's really changed my production, my workflow. And yeah, let's head back down here for a bit and have a little dwell on 2023, what that's going to bring, and we'll see if we can squeeze in that Q&A at the end. Okay, so I've come into the shed where hopefully it's a little bit quieter, out of the wind, it's a little bit messier. I have to excuse the mess, definitely need to tidy up my shed. I just want to mention two of my favourite things from this year, or one particular moment, which was when I stumbled across a hedgehog on my allotment, and it just made me so happy, because I haven't seen a hedgehog in years, a really long time, and it was just rustling its way through my allotment, and I was like, what the hell is that? And then I looked up really close, and there it was, little hedgehog rustling its way, and that was one of my favourite moments. But on the wildlife side, I had so many birds nesting in the hedgerows of my allotment this year, so many different species that I'd never noticed before, and sometimes I got a real glimpse of those little fledglings, the birds. But I remember spending quite a lot of time just sitting there and watching them dart back and forth, the parents from the nest, and that was so lovely. So yeah, those are my two favourite things from this year. It's always wildlife related with me, isn't it? So looking ahead to next year, 2023, it's going to be quite a big year, because as I've already mentioned, I'm getting married next year, and I'm going to be growing as many of my own wedding flowers as I can, which is going to be a great new challenge. And I'm so excited, because I don't know, sometimes you get stuck in your way of growing the same thing every year, like the potatoes and, you know, just the general crops that you grow. So to be growing so many new flowers that I've never grown before, and to have that challenge, I'm really looking forward to it, actually. And just to sort of, as a way of mixing things up a bit, it's going to be yeah, I'm really keen to get going. And also, when you're growing your own flowers, you can start the seed much earlier than you would your normal vegetables, which you start in sort of late March going into sort of April. Some of the flowers I'll be starting in February, which means my growing year will start a lot earlier this time, which is also pretty awesome. So it won't be long before I'm seed sowing. My plan is in process at the moment. I've got to decide where everything's going to go, where everything's going to fit. And I know quite a few of you have asked, will you still be growing vegetables? The answer is yes, absolutely, because, well, I can't be without them. But also it's in my allotment rules. You know, my allotment isn't just for growing flowers. I have to dedicate so much of my plot to growing vegetables. So I will still be growing a lot of vegetables. Don't worry about that. So yes, it's going to be very floral. I hope you'll still be here. I know some of you are definite veg enthusiasts, but yes, there's going to be a lot of flowers going on. And I have just started a new sort of playlist, wedding playlist, flowers playlist. If you've not caught up on all that news, just click on the thing up there and it will take you to it. So now let's have a little bit of reflection on, with all that good and bad, what have I learnt this year? My top lessons learnt. Now, I've put here that my direct sown crops need to go in much earlier. And that's things like the parsnips that I mentioned, because if our summers are going to be getting hotter and earlier with our drier springs, then I think I need to be paying much more attention to when it's going to rain, how long it's going to rain for, and what the temperatures are. So if we have a key 2 weeks in early April when it's going to rain but be quite mild, that's when I need to be sowing my carrots and my parsnips. I direct sow very few crops. It's mainly those that don't like the root disturbance. So that's what I'll need to be doing next year. And also, when using grow lights for chilies, sow a bit later. So this year I actually started my rather elaborate system at home with my cabinet and my grow lights. Again, there's a video about it if you're not sure, which was fantastic because the chilies came up so quickly and so lush and healthy because they had all this light, but it did mean that they grew so much quicker than if I wasn't using grow lights at such a good power, you know, these fantastic grow lights, which meant they grew quickly. And then very quickly I had too many plants that were too big and it was still way too early to put them into the tunnel, so then they started to get a little bit leggy. And then if you add into that the thrips that happened, they very quickly started to go a little bit ooh, 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 and before you knew it, yeah. So if you're using grow lights, and especially if you're using grow lights, you know, next year for the first time, just bear in mind that they're going to grow rapidly, more than you're used to with just the daylight, and take that into account with your whole planting situation. Oh, and something else that I've learned, I guess it's not quite a lesson, but it's something that I'm doing differently. I guess it's a lesson. Basically, I'm being much less wasteful with the crops that I harvest. And part of that is with a new kitchen gadget that I'm using, and that is my Ninja soup maker slash blender. Now, you might be thinking, I don't need a soup maker, you just put it on the hob, let it boil, and then blend it. And I would have agreed with you until I got my soup maker, because it has a heating element in it, it chops it, it blends it, and it does the whole shebang, and you don't have to keep looking at it, and it does it in about half an hour, and it's fantastic. And I'm not trying to sell you this kitchen gadget, you don't necessarily need it, but for me, I found that it's great for leftover food that's about to go off, or when you've just got a couple of this and a couple of that. I just throw it in there, make a soup, and it's great. And also, this little gadget has been making smoothies for me, and I've never been one for smoothies. In fact, I didn't think I even really liked them. I'd never buy a smoothie. But with the glut of the blackberries and all the other fruits, I've made so many smoothies this year, and I'm a convert. I love smoothies. So this blender's actually changed my life a little bit, and also because you can use it to blend hot food, whereas a lot of blenders you can't put hot ingredients into it. It's really opened up the options to me. And you know, sometimes when you get something that inspires you to try doing new things or new recipes, yeah, it's that. So it makes sauces as well. I mean, I could do a whole video about this blender if you want, but I need to give a massive thank you to one of you guys. And I'm really sorry I didn't write down your name to say it out loud now, but I'll make sure I put it across the screen, because there was a certain subscriber who donated to my channel, and this money I put towards my Ninja blender. So you're actually helping me create less food waste and to be more inspired and passionate in the kitchen. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate all of your contributions. Have we got time for the Q&A? It's just 5 questions. I'll try not to be too long. So over on Instagram, I put a little box up to see what you wanted to know from me, and I've picked out 5 questions. I'm sorry I didn't have enough time to do all of them, so I'll just run them through those now. So Aaron Dukes 0 asks, what made you the happiest this year and why? And I think that was a great question. And I'm quite an indecisive kind of person, so I've put 3 points down, because I don't know if you mean in general or on the allotment, so I put 3 things down. Number 1 was my engagement day, because that was probably my favourite day this year. We had such a romantic trip out, and now I'm a fiance and I'm gonna get married, which is crazy. After so long together, he popped the question, and yeah, it's a bit lovey-dovey, but that was my favourite day this year. Another of my favourite moments was actually visiting the shows and meeting you guys, because after being kept indoors and away from everyone for so long, it was just so nice to be back out there and to meet you all. And the third point for my allotment was just sitting amongst the cosmos with the bees, because I could just drift off into my own little dreamy wonderland world, and I just love watching them. So it's a very simple thing, but yeah, just sitting amongst the cosmos or deadheading the cosmos was my favourite thing this year. Next question from Tim Howell. Hey Tim, how long does it take to edit one of your excellent videos? Thank you Tim, and thanks for watching. That depends on the length of the video and also how much footage there is, not just how many clips, but if I have to overlay clips on top of clips like I've probably done in this video, that takes time because I have to go back through the archive, find it, upload it. But in general, I'd say from the moment I'm importing all the footage to the moment I press publish on YouTube, that process takes between 2 to 4 hours. As I say, it depends on the video. Some of them are a lot more in depth than others, but yeah, about that long. But what's made that a lot quicker actually is the laptop I bought last year. I used to have like a 15-year-old Mac, and the export from the video software used to take like an hour and a half, and now it takes about 3 minutes, which is just mind-blowing still to me. So yeah, that's really changed things. Next question from Carl Waterfield. Hey Carl, would you ever want to be a head gardener? Great question. So Carl, he works at Kelmarsh Hall, which is in Northamptonshire. Fantastic garden to visit if you're in the area. And do I want to be a head gardener? Well, if you'd have asked me that when I was working as a gardener, yes, definitely. I think the connection that you have when you're working in a garden day in, day out is like nothing else. It was a different feeling to my allotment because I was there so much more. And you're connected with the wildlife, the seasons, and the light as well. It's a really deep connection that you have with a garden. And yes, if you'd have asked me then, I definitely would have wanted to be a head gardener. But I left that job. The people were awful, but that connection was probably the best thing and what I love and perhaps miss the most. But working as a gardener, it's so straining on your body, and I don't think my knees could take it anymore, if I'm perfectly honest with you. And another thing that I didn't expect was for it to be, it's quite a lonely kind of job unless you're working on a big garden with a big team, which I wasn't. You're on your own a lot, and although I do thrive on my own and I like my own company, my own time, I definitely perhaps thrive best when I'm with others, with other like-minded people that are passionate about plants. So no, at this moment in time I don't want to be a head gardener, but I probably would have done when I was working as a gardener. Kind of leading on from that question, I've got a new one from Propagate Like a Proper Great. What a name. How is your job going at the nursery? Really keen to hear as I work at one too. Now, so yes, I was made redundant from the gardening job in 2020, and I started a new role in a nursery in January 2021. Yeah, so I've been there almost 2 years and I love it. It's great. I started on the production line, working, potting up, doing all that kind of thing. I got a promotion and now I manage the plant centre and essentially the retail side of the nursery, which is a very new development for this nursery, and it's fun. I love it because the job is so varied. You know, I'm looking after plants, I'm meeting people, I'm talking about plants as I sell them, and I'm also working with a great team. And I think that is the key thing, because you could be working in a garden of your dreams, but if the people there aren't supporting you, or if they're not kind to you, then you're not going to be happy. And I just find I'm so happy where I am now, and I'm in my element doing all the things that I love. So yeah, I'm loving it. And I hope you're loving it too in the nursery that you work at. But I think it's also a great point to raise that if you're new to horticulture and you're thinking of taking that career change, then nursery work is a great place because you get to learn so many plant names. You're hands-on with plants, you're with plant people, you'll probably get to meet a load of new different people in the industry, and it's probably a great place to start. So yeah, big up to all the nurseries and the other nursery folk who are watching. And the last question, this is quite a big question actually. So Ashley Grows asks, do you find that motivation comes and goes throughout the season? And if so, how do you turn around the lows and feel inspired again? Yeah, it does happen, and it happens to me every year. Particularly, I think, sort of like late May, when I know it's springtime and the flowers are looking great, but in your head and emotionally it's draining because you've got seedlings everywhere in the polytunnel. The weeds are coming up, they're overwhelming, you've got potting up to do, planting out to do, and it just gets so overwhelming. You just want to just sit back and say, nope, can't do it. So I know I get sort of overwhelmed sort of late May time, and also at the end of summer, sort of mid to late August, after the heat of the summer. You know, a lot of the plants are starting to look a bit frazzled. Some crops might have absolutely failed, and it's just a little bit you know, especially after the heat of the summer, you just feel a little bit frazzled. So yeah, I definitely feel it. I think everybody does, and my advice would be, don't beat yourself up about it. You know, if you don't want to go, don't, you know, and don't feel guilty about that. You know, perhaps you enjoy other hobbies, perhaps you should try those for a little while. You know, take a break if you need it, and especially from social media, because it's so easy to look on there, especially if they're the main sort of accounts that you follow, and it can be overwhelming. You'll probably compare yourself to other people, and that's not what we should be doing. So definitely for your own mental health, take a break if you need it. Advice I put down here was to go somewhere different. You know, take a walk or visit your own garden, but with no expectation to do any work. Perhaps you can just sit there and enjoy the wildlife, listen to the birds, you know, look at the details, and just be there for the sensual sort of experience, and not necessarily, oh, I've got to do this weeding today and I don't want to do it, you know. Or if you do want to do something, just give yourself like 10 minutes. Say, okay, these next 10 minutes I'm going to remove the weeds from these pots only, and then after those 10 minutes you can carry on if you want to, or think, oh well, I've done it, I don't want to carry on, but I've done something, you've achieved something, and you can go home and feel a little bit better. But yeah, sometimes visiting other gardens or even going somewhere with a friend can really help, and doing things at your own pace as well is really important, because you know, some days I know I've got big jobs to do, but I won't do them, because if I'm not in the mental space for it, I'm not going to enjoy it. And you've got to enjoy it. If you don't enjoy what you're doing, then don't do it or take a break from it. So I'll take on the weeds when the conditions are much better and my head's better, you know. I'm going to take on them thistles when I'm really going to tackle them. So yeah, just do things at your own pace and do what you want to do is what I'd say. Oh my gosh, I've gone on for quite a while, haven't I? Well, I best wrap this up, because it will soon be New Year's Eve, and oh my gosh, a new year is approaching, and I'm really excited. And I know that sometimes it can take a while for us to come out of this winter slumber of hibernating indoors, and then we've got to go outside and start sowing things. And yeah, the motivation for that can also be quite a big deal. It might take you a little while to sort of get back into it, and that's okay. But I am ready to go all guns blazing, and I will be sowing some seeds from about February, which is really exciting because that's not far away. Whew. Right, well, I'm going to leave you to it. I hope you have a fantastic New Year. Happy New Year. I don't have a drink to cheers you. Chink. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much for all of your contributions this year. I absolutely love reading all your comments, so do let me know if Father Christmas brought you anything garden related in the comments, or maybe you gave a gift and they were delighted with it. Do let me know. I just love to hear from you, so thank you so much. Thank you for all the contributions, for buying me coffees, the random PayPal pings that I get which make my day, that pay for all my compost. Oh yeah, thanks for sticking around. I'm so close to 100,000 subscribers now, it's ridiculous. So I've got that to look forward to early on in the new year. So yes, thank you very much, take care, and I'll see you in 2023. Happy New Year!